In 2022, the American economy grew at 2.1%, and China's economy grew at 2.99. In all of this, EU was doing a bit better at 3.5%, but India was in a league of its own. The Indian GDP grew at 7%. This is a great achievement for India, especially when you look at the fact that India has one of the lowest female workplace participation in the world. And this percentage of women participating is shrinking every year, impacting about 670 million women in India, which is about twice the population of America. Imagine what the Indian GDP and the economy would look like if more women were able to participate in its economy. Well, that's exactly what we break down in today's video. We will look at what are the reasons why women are leaving workplace and what are some of the solutions to this problem. So let's get started. Now, India is a country that is very frequently compared to China as one of the next big world powers, if not a superpower. And there are a few reasons for this comparison. Both the countries have very similar population size. Both countries were isolated from the West till 1990s. And around the same time, both the countries moved away from socialism to a blend of capitalism in China and full-blown capitalism in India. Even the size of the two economies in 1990 was very similar. However, in the 3 decades since, China has blown past India. Now, there are a lot of differences between the Chinese and the Indian economy, and the mixture of all these differences is perhaps what has led to this situation where China is leading by a whole bunch. However, one of the key success factors for China has been its ability to bring its women into the workforce. The difference between the two countries is quite evident when you look at the numbers. The participation rate for women in India is at 24%. Meanwhile, in China, the percentage is close to 61, which is down from 73 at its peak. Now, in all fairness to India, China is one anomaly. But even if you compare India to the world's average, which is around 48% participation rate, it still doesn't really add up. Why are there just 24% of the women in India participating in the workforce? Indian women's participation is so low that globally it ranks in the lowest 20 countries. Even for India in 1993, the participation rate was 42.6%. Meanwhile, in 2022, about 3 decades after, it's close to 24%. And again, I don't have to explain why this isn't the best thing to happen to a growing economy or to women in general. So, what is going on? Why such a sharp decline? Now, there are mainly 3 driving forces behind this decline. The first one being the societal expectations and gender roles that exist within India. In India, there are certain societal expectations that dictate what women should do and should not do. Now, I grew up in India in a family where my mother worked. Now, if you're someone watching this video from India and understands English, probably your growing up was similar, where there were not a lot of gender norms that were talked about or enforced upon the women in the house. However, for certain parts of the country, these gender norms are still very much a thing. Women are expected to do things differently than men. There are gender norms that are enforced on girls from as early as 13 years old. They have to learn how to cook and help with the household chores. Meanwhile, the restrictions of the boys just aren't there. The gender norms also dictate that women get married, have children, and then raise them, stay at home, and just make sure they are taking care of the family. In these parts of the country, for even the women who have decided to go out and work, may face a certain level of criticism or judgment from their community and the society they live in. In many households, women are expected to work only as a backup if the male loses their job, or as a secondary income source to support the increasing cost of living. In many cases, as the household income goes up, a lot of these women step out of the workforce. And that is one of the reasons why there's been that decline from 1990s towards 2022. As the country has seen this rapid growth in its economy, a lot of these households have seen an increase in their household income, which is further translated into women just not needing to work as a backup. Now, this explains some of the decline. There's another factor, that is the lack of quality education and quality job opportunities for women that suits their needs. See, the Chinese economy, which is typically the benchmark Indian economy is held to, is based around manufacturing, which allows a lot of the less educated Chinese women to find jobs in these factories, benefiting both the economy and the women. Meanwhile, in India, there aren't a lot of factory jobs that are accessible to women with low levels of education, which forces a lot of these women to work as domestic helps from sunrise to sunset, with very little salaries and very few rights to speak of. In general, the Indian manufacturing sector is not as big as China, nor is it ready to employ all these women that are in need of jobs. Meanwhile, for the service industry, where education and training are very important for getting a decent career, many women in India do not have access to quality education or training that would prepare them for these roles. Women participation in secondary and primary education has increased in the last 15 years. However, the participation on the tertiary level has been poor. And once again, I would like to remind everyone watching this, it's not about being offended. A lot of the Indian viewers tend to be offended by such statements. There are basically two Indias. The reality a lot of you who can understand this video in English live, and then the rural India where the opportunities are not exactly the same as you may have access to. Now, this lack of educational and job opportunities is down to cultural norms and the failure of the past governments. I mean, I'm not just blaming the current Modi government or anything. Many governments have come and gone, but not as much as should have been done has been done to fix this issue. This lack of job and educational opportunities for women has also contributed to the decline in participation we saw from 1990s to today. One of the dominant job sectors in India has been agriculture. With the increased availability of farming implements and equipment, there are fewer and fewer jobs in that sector. And without any education, most of these women find it hard to get a job elsewhere due to the social pressures. Working in factories or men-dominated industries is highly discouraged, especially in the rural India, leaving these women who were once part of the agricultural workforce with very few options. And I guess the final reason as to why we see these numbers dropping so fast is that these statistics are not accounting for the unpaid work that women do in Indian households. You see, Indian women perform about 3 times as much unpaid work at home as compared to men, leaving them very little time to work at paid jobs. This comes from the cultural and traditional norms which expect women to take care of the household, especially after getting married. Meanwhile, men don't have to contribute at all, according to the norms at least. According to a survey carried out in Mumbai, Delhi, and 3 other big cities in India, with some of the highest women participation in workforce in the country, about 85% of women who participated in the survey felt like they had 2 full-time jobs. The funny thing is, most of the men who participated in the survey agreed with it. I mean, what the fajita? If you know that there's some sort of imbalance in the society and you're very aware of it, dear men, let's do something about it. Isn't marriage, after all, about equal participation? I guess this survey goes to show the cultural acceptance of the situation amongst both men and women. They just are fine with the way it is. You see, when a kid or an elderly in the family falls sick, even working women are expected to take time off from work and stay home and take care of the person in need. And which, of course, doesn't help with the scope of growth at work or even retaining your job. I mean, if you take too many days off because you were too busy taking care of someone sick at home, you'll eventually lose your job. Now, on top of all these factors, sprinkle a little bit of misogyny, gender discrimination at workplace, and you'll really understand why Indian women are stepping out of the workforce and are not participating as much. Now, when speaking about empowering women and giving them jobs across the globe, there are many benefits that directly help women. But for India in particular, there is an economic advantage of getting all these women participating. I mean, 48% of the country is women. According to some calculations and estimates, increasing the women participation in India from 24 to about 48, which is the global average, will add $700 billion to the Indian economy in the next 10 years. That is a massive number, especially when you're trying to compete with China. This is one of those videos where a lot can be done by the government, but the heavy lifting has to be done by the society. A lot of the things standing in the way of the country's economy and the empowerment of women comes from these societal norms, the way the society has established itself, and all of those things. And that's it for this video. I hope that explains why more and more women in India are stepping out of the workforce. I'll see you in a week or so's time. Till then, peace, bye.